Welcome to 6 African Trade Talks, the show that brings you closer to the intra-Africa trade business world. I'm your host, Chad Chawanda. In this episode, our guest is Professor Wolfgang Georg Arlt. Professor Arlt is the founder and CEO of the Hamburg-based COTRI China Outbound Tourism Research Institute. Professor, welcome to 6 African Trade Talks. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to join today. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Before we start our show, we'd like to hear a word from our sponsors.
Would you travel to Cape Town for business or leisure? What if you could combine the two? Well, you can. With Optimum African Experience, Cape Town Leisure Experience, with partners such as University of Cape Town, CEDA, Kadena, Luminary, and Prime Focus. Experience the best of Africa.
Professor, what is the one thing nobody knows about you? It could be a turning point in your life or something major that turned the course of your life. Anything you'd like to share that you think many people don't know about you?
Okay, that's a very good question. Many people are always surprised about this. It's when I tell them that the first time I was traveling to the People's Republic of China was back in 1978. So because, well, a lot of people have not been born at that time, but also, of course, China was closed at that time. And I was very lucky that I could join some research project, which brought me to China at a time when it was still a very poor, very underdeveloped country. And so that gave me the opportunity to see the development from the very beginning until the situation how it is today. And certainly this first visit to China to see a world which was completely different from what we have in Europe, that was certainly a life changer for me.
Interesting. Wow. Thank you very much for sharing. Who is Professor Arlt? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Okay, I'm a German. I grew up in West Berlin, and I've been working basically all my life with China and with tourism. So I started out to be a tour operator, bringing Europeans to China. But then in the 1990s, I have been mostly working on bringing Chinese business delegations to Europe, especially for transportation, for logistics. So we have been working with companies like Siemens to build the first metro lines, the first one in Shenzhen, the second one in Shanghai. So these were times when Chinese people, it was still a very big thing to go out of China, and almost all of them were first time ever in their life out of China. And then after the new millennium, I finished my PhD finally. And then for the last 20 years, I've been a full-time tourism professor teaching international tourism management and COTRI, China Outbound Tourism Research Institute. So this is something I started in 2004 to keep my knowledge alive and to disseminate the knowledge that, and I've been telling people at that time, watch out, the Chinese market is coming and will grow. So China will grow economically, and that also will include more outbound tourists. In the beginning, most people were laughing about that and said, no, come on, we know the Chinese people are poor. So maybe we go to China to see the Great Wall, of course, but the Chinese being our customers, hard to believe. But within a decade, China was the tourism source market #1 in the world. And of course, before the pandemic started in 2019, we had about 10% of all international travelers were starting their trip in China. So the Institute has been working for many years, helping people to make Chinese visitors happy and to earn some money in the progress. And I also had the pleasure several times to work in Africa. So I've been working in Kenya, doing some trainings in Nairobi. I have been invited to give some trainings and some speeches also at a tourism fair in Madagascar. And I've been to Réunion and to Mauritius, and also in the north. We had a big project for Tunisia. So I've been two times with Tunisian delegations, one time in Singapore and then one time in China to help them to develop that market. And of course, before the pandemic, many people have been saying that Africa is the next big story for Chinese outbound tourism. So of course, all this has been stopped for almost 3 years because of COVID problem. But I think it's a very good idea to talk about this topic because certainly once in China we get rid of the virus problem, there will be a big wave of Chinese tourists also coming to Africa.
Interesting journey. Thank you very much for sharing, Professor. I know you touched a little bit about your research institute, but give us a little bit more detail in terms of the China Outbound Tourism Research Institute. What does the institute do?
We have training programs. Also, we have online training programs. At the moment, we are just updating the 2023 edition, helping people to understand the Chinese source market, so the cultural background, the demand and expectations of Chinese travelers. We also do consulting work, so helping destinations on a government level, but also companies to prepare for the Chinese market and to adapt products. That's a very important part, that many Chinese have different expectations than the Western tourists. We do publications. We have something called the COTRI Weekly, which is a weekly newsletter where I'm writing an editorial every week, which is free for everybody to subscribe. Just go to Google and Google COTRI Weekly, and you will find where you can subscribe to that. We are going to publish an ebook in January, which is called 88 Practical Tips to Work for the New Wave of Chinese Outbound Tourists, together with colleagues. So that will be an ebook, so easy to access, and it will not be very expensive. And it will give a lot of advice, especially for the situation post-pandemic. And we have been doing other publications in the past. So it is training, consulting, helping with strategy development, helping with developing the products in the way that the Chinese people are happy with that. And when we say the Chinese people, of course, like in every market, while we talked about 170 million trips in 2019. So obviously there's not one Chinese market. So young people are different from older people. People from the big cities are different from people from smaller cities, like everywhere else, also in China. So one important thing is also that we help to identify what is the right section of the market for your product or for your destination, so that the marketing accordingly done in the right way. So the storytelling can be done in the right way. Depends on if you have some people, let's say, who are very interested in nature and more maybe interested in safari, taking photos, or other maybe some younger people who say, well, I don't want just to take photos. I want really to live locally with people and have a deeper level of immersion into local culture. Of course, you have to have different products for them. And so that is what we have been doing practically all over the world. So from Iceland in the north. Actually, I forgot to mention, we have also been working with South Africa. I've been also doing some trainings there. So from Iceland to South Africa, from United States to New Zealand, I've been traveling quite a lot before the pandemic, and now it's slowly starting again. And of course, what we try especially to do is to help to develop new destinations. I think this is something which is also for your audience important to know that many Chinese people have been in the decades before the pandemic, have been traveling to the usual places, to Sydney, to Rome, to New York. So they tick this off. And so clearly one of the trends, what we can see from our surveys now, is that after the pandemic, people will be interested to go to new places. And also not only for shopping in Paris, but more to have experiences, as I just said, with the local people, and so that and go to places not so many other Chinese people have been going to. So there is clearly a good chance. And we have been working with places like Papua New Guinea and with Laos, with places which are not so a hot destination yet for Chinese people. What I've been seeing, of course, Africa has such a high level of diversity and so much interesting culture that certainly there is a very, very good opportunity for African destinations and African companies to attract more Chinese tourists in the future.
You know, your experience is so amazing, and you've had an unfair advantage of going to China in 1978. So I can just imagine what you have seen and how the world has changed in general across all continents and different countries that you've visited. So, I'm enjoying, and I'm sure our audience is enjoying learning. How do you think technology has impacted the tourism sector globally when it comes to attracting tourists to the different parts of the world? And what role do you see it play in the future?
Of course, you're mentioning the right thing. This is, of course, one of the biggest changes now is that I have a Chinese friend, and he told me that he was one of the first students sent from China to Europe. That was the end of the 70s. And he was sent to Poland in Eastern Europe. And he said he was in Beijing and he couldn't find out even what is the weather, what is the climate in Poland, or what do they eat in Poland. There was no way to find any information. If you look from today, well, it takes 5 seconds. You Google and you have, after 1 hour, you're an expert on Polish weather and Polish cuisine. Also, when I was traveling in the 1980s with German and other European tourists in China, so there were almost no computers in China. It was very hard to make a phone call. So when I was arriving at a new city with my group in a hotel, in most cases, the hotel had never heard about the reservation we made, and it was all very complicated. And also, I think a key point is that technology and the social media and the internet have helped people that you can have so much information now. So if you're thinking, okay, somebody told me Rwanda is a nice place, you can just go online and you will find so much information, so many pictures, so many other people writing about their experiences in traveling to that place. So you have a very clear idea. From the industry side, for us as a tourism industry, of course, technology makes it much easier. The booking can be done online and you have a very easy flow of information. But from the customers, from the traveler side, the key point is really that now you can get so much more information. And this is official information from the website of maybe the National Tourism Organization, but also, and more importantly, information from other travelers who have been there already. And in China, there are some platforms where you have really millions of people exchanging information about the trips to a very detailed. So you can find people discussing, if you're in this city in Africa, you can go to this other city, 2 bus companies, and you should use the one with the red buses and not the one with the blue buses because the seats are more comfortable or whatever. So you find very detailed information from other travelers. And this is, of course, something which has changed the whole game. It has become very hard to cheat people because they will have all the information on their fingertips. And also for prices, of course, people can compare easily prices from different sources. So technology has been helping also and will help in the future, especially lesser known places to become visible. And if you tell your story right, to become attractive for travelers. So even if you don't have an Eiffel Tower and you don't have a Statue of Liberty, people don't know much about your place. It's very easy for them to learn. And that is a key point. And of course, within the country, within the destinations, of course, it also helps that there is a much smoother trip now because you have all the technical information. And also, one other important thing is for Chinese people, among the younger people, and we talk here about the top 10% of the society, so the people who have better education and have enough money to travel. Among the younger people, many of them speak at least some English, but for the maybe people above 45, 50 years, normally they only speak Chinese. And now you have all these apps or little gadgets, little machines where you speak in your language and it translates automatically and speaks in the other language. So you can speak a sentence in Chinese and it will come out in Hausa or Go or whatever. So that is, of course, also solving one of the big problems we had in the past, which was the language problem, that many Chinese people speak only Chinese. And of course, you don't have so many Chinese-speaking people in the destination. So that is certainly something which has made it much easier to attract people, to have people learning about what you have to offer. And then when they're there, to have a high quality experience for the people. And also, of course, afterwards, makes it much easier to you to keep in touch with your customers. For instance, we're working with a company in China where we are selling souvenirs or handicraft or food and beverages from the country in the Chinese market, using Chinese sales apps. So you can even keep in contact with your customers. And if they like your local kind of wine or other beverages, you can sell to them afterwards through this sales app, even after they returned to China, products which they might not find in a Chinese supermarket. You can sell to that. So you can keep also in touch with them and, of course, maybe help to make them come back to you for another time. Or at least recommend you to friends to say, yeah, that's a great place. You also should go there.
The power of technology. As you were talking, you also brought a memory to me. My first encounter with Chinese visitors, it was in South Africa when a Chinese that lived in Zimbabwe had a guest and he left me with the guest. The guy couldn't speak English and we struggled to get breakfast. it was not easy. So the power of technology, I can imagine what it would have been today. It would have been easier and you would have enjoyed Africa more. So thank you very much for sharing. What advice would you give countries or regions that are struggling to improve their tourism sectors? And take us through a little bit of an understanding of what meaningful tourism is.
So what we have developed in the last years, based on our experience with China, but not only for the Chinese market, but also for the Chinese market, is this concept of meaningful tourism. And that is basically the idea that you have different stakeholders in tourism, and it only works if all of them are getting benefits and are satisfied with what is the outcome. It's not enough that the guests are happy, but the host communities are not, because they don't get their share, or that the company earns a lot of money, but the employees are not paid a fair wage, and then they will not be friendly to the visitors. So you have to take good care of the environment as well. So that meaningful tourism means that to develop a strategy where all the stakeholders are taken care of. So not only some of them. So I think in Africa, you had in the past experience that you would say, okay, this is now a national park and the local people are no longer allowed to have agriculture here because we have to protect the elephants. But then what do the local people do if they don't? They need to earn some money. So you also have to say, okay, what is the benefit for the local people from creating such a national park, for instance? So my advice is clearly that to develop for the Chinese market and for other new markets a clear strategy by starting to see, okay, what are the resources we have? How can we also be a bit different from other places? So if you come up with the idea, oh, let's offer a safari, you're competing with all the other people who already are offering safaris. And it's much better to look at, okay, locally, what interesting culture do we have to offer? So there are a lot of people interested in music, in painting, in dancing, in all kinds of art. And also, I think in Africa, you have a lot of young creative designers and media people. And so it's also very interesting for young Chinese entrepreneurs, for instance, to meet people who are running startups in African cities and talk to them. When we talk about travelers, it's not only leisure. It's not only people going to some beach resort or going on a safari. There are lots of people also interested in the local regional cultures and also in meeting other people for business experiences and maybe creating some business together. So that is the advice, is to look at what is different and what specifically can we offer. Of course, you need to train the people. And so we have been doing offline trainings, but now we also can offer online trainings. And normally a combination of both is best, so that the people also understand, okay, what are the interests of these people. So just one example, most Chinese travelers have money, but they don't have much time. So they will be compared to European travelers. What Europeans might do in 3 days, they want to do in half a day. So everything has to be well organized and a short and deep experience. So that is, in many cases, the first thing to think about, okay, how can we do this more focused and more concentrated? So see what kind of market we have things to offer for. So in the big cities, maybe more for younger people, rural tourism, for culture tourism, maybe more middle-aged, a bit older people. And then how can we create a story? So I think that's the key point. You have to tell the Chinese people, why should I come to this place? What is there which is special, which I cannot get in other places, and develop the product accordingly. So meaningful tourism, meaning that you do this in a way which is not harmful for the environment, but it's also something where the host community can clearly see what is their advantage. So somebody in a discussion recently said, happy hosts make happy visitors. You know, we had this discussion of over-tourism, and in some destinations, the locals, throwing stones at the tourists because they see that they take away their resources. So that you have to also clearly have a policy which also gives benefits to the local people and for the local community, to offer jobs which go beyond cleaning woman and waiter, so that also you are pushing, and that is also, of course, a job for the government to provide education, so that you can also have, from this tourism development, people getting jobs also on the management level, not only on the low income jobs level. So in the past, And even today, still many people look at arrival numbers. So as a KPI, as a key performance indicator, so how many people are coming, and you have a press release, oh, wonderful, we had 25% more arrivals. But that doesn't tell you anything, because maybe this is a kind of tourism which is like cruise ships, where you have a lot of arrivals, but the people spend very little because they sleep and eat on the ship, which is harmful to the environment, or which is treating the local people just like this is another element of the safari, just saying, oh, let's take some nice photos of these people, but never understanding what is really their culture. So that the local people say, hey, I'm not a zebra, I'm not a giraffe, I'm a human being, I want to be treated with more respect. So that you keep all this in mind and rather go not for quantity, not saying we need more arrival numbers, but to say we need more satisfied travelers spending more money, staying longer, and going home and telling their friends this is a great place. Because the best marketing you can do is recommendation marketing. So in China, there are so many people doing social media marketing. So you will be one voice among 10,000 or 100,000. So if you don't have a very big marketing budget, and most destinations and companies in Africa don't have such a big marketing budget, your voice will not be heard. But if you have happy visitors who go back home and tell their friends, and again, technology that can be their real friends, their neighbors, their colleagues at work, but it can also be their virtual connections. So tell them, well, this is a great place. You have to go there. This is the best marketing you can have, because everybody believes what your friend is telling you, but people believe less and less what some advertisement is telling them. So that is an important point, that you go away from just saying, what is the arrival numbers? And for that, we are creating at the moment a meaningful tourism index, where we have developed for the 6 main stakeholders measuring criteria, so that we can create a ranking and we can tell for each destination, okay, where's your overall position in terms of meaningful tourism, and where are your strong points and where are your weak points, so where you need to do something. The Meaningful Tourism Center, which is the other half of our company next to COTRI, is of course happy to help with all that stuff. You see a lot of destinations have only concentrated on one product, and in Africa that is either safari or it is beach resort. But the problem with this product, you are competing with so many other people which have something similar. So you end up to compete on price, which is a bad idea. So this is a downward spiral. So everybody tries to be a bit cheaper than the other one. So in the end, you don't earn much money. And if you have an all-inclusive resort on the beach, well, the local community, again, is not earning much money from this, as the people stay inside their all-inclusive resort and maybe drink a European or American beer, and even the local farmers cannot sell much products to the kitchen of these all-inclusive resorts. So that will be something where I can say, yeah, wow, we have so many visitors, but not much money stays in the local community, not much money goes to the local or maybe even national government. So that is an important point. And again, we have been working with some destinations on that to develop new methods to measure what is a successful tourism development. That means success in being not damaging the environment, bringing profit to the companies, of course, bringing taxes to the government, but also creating meaningful jobs, giving some of the benefits to the local community, and of course, having satisfied customers.
Interesting. Happy hosts. Before we continue, I would like to hear a word from our sponsors.
Would you travel to Cape Town for business or leisure? What if you could combine the two? Well, you can. With Optimum African Experience, Cape Town Leisure Experience, with partners such as University of Cape Town, CEDA, Kadena, Luminary, and Prime Focus. Experience the best of Africa.
What have you learned in your encounter between the work you do and your experience interacting with people from different cultures?
This is, I think, the best part of my job. And I have spent, I can say, my life learning about how different people in different countries in the world with different cultural backgrounds can see the world. And this is something which I find the most interesting part of the whole also tourism business, that you get in contact with people from a totally different cultural backgrounds. Just one example, I'm a German, so we Germans are supposed to be punctual. And of course, in Germany, punctuality is seen as a virtue, so that you should always be on time. And if you're 5 minutes late, you have to excuse yourself and have a good reason, the traffic or whatever. When I was in China, people were telling me, wow, to be punctual is a sign of a lack of flexibility, because if you do something important, you don't stop doing this important thing because you have another appointment for something not important. So to say, oh, I have to stop my important activity now because I have to go to the next one, even though that is not important, that is stupid. I said we've been working, for instance, with Siemens. So I've been training for German engineers, telling them that from a Chinese point of view, punctuality is not a virtue, but a sign of stupidity. Wow, that is something very hard to swallow for German engineers. There are many such things where you learn about yourself. If tourism is done in the right way, it is something where also the host community and the guests have the benefit that they can learn from each other, and that they can learn about such things, that you can see things in a very different way. And you can have a very different idea about, for instance, the relation between you and your environment. I mean, one of the things you have to realize that the Chinese traveling to Africa, so most of them are living in the big cities, and big city means 10 million or more than 10 million. And so they live far away from any nature experience. Kids never see a lizard or something like that in the street somewhere in the park, because in Shanghai there aren't any. And so therefore this idea of what is your relation to nature and how much is nature a part of your own life, that will be a big difference when Chinese people come to Africa. I think this is something where if you start from the point that cultures are different, and then not one is better than the other or worse than the other, but all the cultures have their base in the local situation and have been developed to react to the local situation. So they all have their merits. So if you start from that, there's so much to learn from other people and from their point of view. This is reflected in the language people are speaking and in the way people are behaving. So the relations between young and old, between children and parents, between women and men. So all this is so different in different places. And a lot of things you take absolutely for granted, like my example with the punctuality. If you stay in your own culture and you never meet people from other cultures, you think your point of view is normal. But if you have contact with other people, then you realize, oh no, this is just one way to see the world, but you can have completely other ways to see the world. And of course, if you go a bit deeper into that, I've been doing a lot of studies about that. So you come to like the concept of time, for instance, so that if you ask somebody here in Germany, how is time? People will say, well, it's like an arrow. It's past, present, future. So time is moving in one direction. You can't go back and you don't know what is the future, but it is moving in one direction, like an arrow. If you ask somebody in China, they will say, look at nature. I mean, you have spring, summer, autumn, winter, and then comes spring again. So it's not an arrow. It's rather a circle. But of course, it's not coming back to the same spring. It's another spring next year, like a spiral. So it's an uprising spiral, but time moves in circles. So what happens sometime in the past, something similar or almost similar can come back in the future. So therefore, it is more important to know about the past than if you think the time is an arrow, then you would say, well, I don't care about what happened in the past. That has nothing to do with me. Which people, of course, are not thinking about if you're not a scientist working in such a field. You don't realize it. But of course, the way you're thinking about history, for instance, will be informed by your idea how is time. So there are many other examples like that. And that makes it really interesting. And of course, it is also helpful to have this kind of understanding for tourism and for the production of the tourism products you're developing for people from different cultures. And in our example, from a culture which is so different from African cultures than the Chinese one.
Interesting. Thank you very much for sharing. What an insight on time.
Okay.
Based on your travel, what tourism business opportunities do you think could be adopted by Africa in 1 minute?
In 1 minute, tell to the younger people that there is a vibrant economic field of startups, of people with new ideas, with creativity, that there is a creative culture scene, that there is a clubbing scene, there's a wonderful music developed in Africa, so that this is a place where you can find other people like yourself who are saying, okay, let's start a new company, let's do something new, let's develop new culture and creativity, and develop for other people interested in culture products which are not just looking at animals, but helping people to understand and to try out and to work with the local culture, with the local art, with the local artisans, so that they can develop a deeper understanding and friendships with the people and not just take a photo of them. Don't try to create the same products everybody else is developing, and try to do something special. And don't be afraid about niche markets, because China is such a big place. Even for a niche product, there will be tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of Chinese people interested in it.
Powerful. Thank you very much. It's diversity. We need to diversify and not just be known as the safari continent. So thank you very much. In your experience as a tourism scientist who has conducted trainings, market research, and expert consultations with different organizations across the globe, what is your opinion about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and travel area?
Well, it is, of course, necessary thing to do for people in China. They have not so much information about Africa, and they rather think of this as one place. So you will have many Chinese visitors not going just to one country, but say, okay, it's a long trip, so I want to go 2 or 3 different countries. So if it is easier for them in terms of visa and so on to travel around, that is very good. From my experience, I think one of the problems, well, you're obviously aware of, is that it is quite difficult and expensive to travel between African countries. So that is certainly something to develop in the future, so that it is easier and not so expensive to travel from one place to another within Africa. So everything which can make it, every regional organization and free trade organization, which makes it easier that you can have a regional experience and not just going to one country, is certainly something which is very important and will have a very positive influence on the development of tourism and of business relations in general.
Thank you. Any podcast or book you'd like to recommend?
What I said before, so we have a weekly online newsletter, which is free, called COTRI Weekly. And actually we have another one just started, which is called Meaningful Tourism Weekly. So both of them are free and can be found online. If I can talk about our own publication, so in January, there will be an ebook about China Outbound tourism. And next summer, I will publish together with a colleague a book with Routledge, which is a most famous tourism publishing house, about the new wave of China's outbound tourism. So that is hopefully giving up-to-date information for the Chinese market. And for Meaningful Tourism, we will publish actually already next month an ebook about meaningful tourism, because we had the Meaningful Tourism Award 2022 this year for the first time a couple of weeks ago. And we will have, of the 18 award winners, we will show what they are doing. And that will be very good best practice examples. I think that will be very good for readers to see what other people have been doing in the sense of meaningful tourism, and to learn from that and to adapt the ideas from other places to their own local destination or their own local company as well. So I think when we talk about China outbound tourism and meaningful tourism, so I would think we are the source of much of that. So that's why I dare to recommend our own publications.
Would you travel to Cape Town for business or leisure? What if you could combine the two? Well, you can. With Optimum African Experience, Cape Town Leisure Experience, with partners such as University of Cape Town, CEDA, Kadena, Luminary, and Prime Focus. Experience the best of Africa.
Africa is a continent full of potential, but potential means nothing if we don't take action to create value. Let us take action. Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to post and share this episode on your social media platforms. It will help us reach our mission of sharing knowledge about intra-Africa trade and making it available to as many people as possible. Let us grow our continent. We can go far, fast, together. If you can please leave a review on our podcast page or on Apple Podcasts.